Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy Jonathan Macri with you for a mid-August, late August, something in August edition of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Excited because for the first time in, I don't know, it feels like close to a month, I'm recording a fresh episode with my better half, Jeremy Cohen. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, John. I'm doing well when I forget that baseball exists, which honestly is pretty frequent right now. Got to tell you, it's been a very, very quiet summer in terms of sports for me. And I don't really mind, like I do, but I don't, because it's been nice to take a break, especially since I saw this tweet from a Yankees account and I was like, the Yankees are looking like the Knicks out there. And I'm thinking, like, if the Yankees were looking like the Knicks, the Yankees would be looking pretty freaking good right now. And they're just not. So, yeah, but we do have the Knicks to talk about. And we have actual Knicks players playing basketball. But yeah, I mean, before we get into that, how are you? How are things?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm finishing up my week away. Last time we spoke, you were away during the Josh Hart emergency live stream. You have lost some of your robust tan, I will say.
Again,
I think you gave it to me.
A lot of that was lighting, but if it wasn't, please take it. My dermatologist would probably prefer it on you than on me.
My wife would probably prefer it on you. She's like, you don't wear enough sunscreen. Yeah, no, it's funny how sports is kind of cyclical. Like, we're sitting here, it's mid-August, and it feels like all eyes are on the football teams, who are still several weeks away from kicking off for real, and like the baseball season's already over. And yeah, there is a lot of, I think, genuinely earned excitement about the Knicks that are playing in the middle of August. We're recording this, we should say, a little after 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. Team USA plays later today. I'll be honest, and I will say I not only do I not know what time they're playing, I don't even know who they're playing. I know they beat Greece yesterday, but I don't know anything about today.
So today, which will be all obsolete by the time people listen to this,
yesterday,
but it's Germany, and it's 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So
okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll see more good Jalen Brunson to add to the good Jalen Brunson we've already seen, and the good RJ Barrett we've already seen. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot of fresh Knicks takes, so it's weird. This episode is dropping in between two episodes that I recorded, one of which already ran, the episode with Yaron Weitzman, and one which is recording next week with a prominent NBA media person. And both episodes featured kind of extensive conversations about Philly and the Joel Embiid thing. So I don't have any fresh Embiid / Philly takes at the moment. And I'm just enjoying watching our guys play FIBA. I don't know what's on your mind as it comes to the Knicks before we get to a fresh cap or no cap.
Just how cool it is that, like, the starting point guard of this Team USA is Jalen Brunson, and he's called Captain America. And I don't know, I
love the nickname. It's so awesome. Good. It's so fitting.
But it just goes to show how he's viewed, and I'm really excited about the opportunity. I mean, look, the results are, at the end of the day, what matters, but just for him to be in such a prominent position as a Knick, and the Knicks are a really good team, there's something about it that gives me butterflies. And I hope they obviously do well for so many different reasons. But it's just very cool to see that, and Josh Hart too being out there as well. But Brunson being the focal point of both Team USA and the Knicks, it just feels like everything's starting to sort of go our way. But I don't want to say it too loud, or else the sports gods will hear it, and that'll be that.
I was about to say, they do need to. I was about to say finish it off. They haven't even started yet because I know the games count so far. They need to actually win the thing for this to really ring true. But like, the reason I love the Captain America nickname so much is because Steve Rogers, I mean, he took some super serum. I'm not going to say he had no superpowers, but in comparison to many other superheroes, you might say that his superpowers were somewhat muted. And yet he's always the leader. People always look to him to be the first one out of the gate and, be there, and everybody kind of falls in line behind him. And that's why I think it's such a perfect nickname for Brunson. Is he the most talented basketball player? No. Is he the tallest guy, fastest guy? Can he jump the highest? No. But there is something about him that I think every Knicks fan, if they're watching this, it's funny. Very briefly, I'm out east. We met up with another family. Their daughter goes to school with our daughter, and it was your prototypical casual Knicks fan. And he was saying to me, he's like, yeah, for basically since the 90s, at some point, like after the 90s, I kind of just tapped out and I stopped really paying close attention. And last year brought me back because of Brunson. And I wonder how many Knicks fans out there are like that. And I think that all kind of wrapped together is why it's so cool to see him in FIBA for sure.
Yeah. Every time he busts his butt, we can now call it America's ass. Which I think is great. To know that America's ass is on the Knicks, it's fantastic.
That's the name for what Benji always highlights when he like manipulates someone like going around a screen and he draws an offensive foul. Maybe we'll just refer to that as America's ass from now on. And just very, very briefly on Hart, like, I think like Gilbert Arenas. I think it was Gilbert Arenas, like made some comments like, yeah, some of these guys don't even start for their own team. I think it's the ultimate compliment that Josh Hart could not start for the Knicks and be on Team USA, because it just goes to show that he is the definition of a player that could play on any team. It's like, again, is he the most talented guy out there? Absolutely not. But the fact that they picked him and they spotlighted him as a guy, okay, one way or another, even if it's mostly on the practice court, he's going to be able to help this team. So I think that's really cool, and we'll see what happens when the real games begin. I believe they kick off on Thursday, and that's that. But today we're going to talk about something else. At which point I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, listen, it's the summer, right?
It is.
Not a lot going on, so I have been kind of thinking over the last couple months, and nothing's again really happening, but I figure, hey, I've had these kind of thoughts in the back of my mind, so might as well share them, discuss them with you, see where my thoughts are at afterwards, all of that. And a lot of it pretty much revolves around Immanuel Quickley. And, I don't want to have a discussion about the contract situation, the exact dollar amount, all of that, because I don't think that's the best use of our time. But there are other factors involved that I do want to discuss. So as we begin, perfect. This is really going to be the abridged version of an IQ discussion. I want to start off in a different direction. The first is really just talking about the breakdown by position, right? So there's in the past thought of, is Immanuel Quickley a point guard? Is he a combo guard? Is he what is he? And by cleaning the glasses definition, I mean, in the first 2 years, he was really a mixture of the two. He was both a point guard and a shooting guard. Last year, he was much more in the shooting guard position, but a huge reason for that was Jalen Brunson and also to a lesser extent, Deuce McBride. Even though Deuce McBride really doesn't play point guard a ton, they still kind of feature him as the number one in that mindset. All this to say, I think that without the presence of a starting caliber point guard, Quickley can really do whatever. But also with Jalen Brunson in the fold, there has the impact of Quickley at the two. But it doesn't really matter, because as long as you can play the two together, and you absolutely can, then it should be fine. But the question, of course, comes into sort of how he is viewed, because he's just a ball player. But if he's viewed as more of a guard, as like a lead guard versus maybe an off-ball guard, that might have an impact in terms of how the Knicks plan accordingly. Before I continue, John, I want to turn it over to you. Any pressing thoughts?
The only one is something I've shared. Me and Andrew talk about this a lot online and actually more offline. This is the one thing that we seem to always get into it with each other, just like when we're shooting the shit via text, because to his credit, much like a lot of Quickley fans, I think Andrew Claudio is who's producing this episode, I should say, and is listening to every word I'm saying, is like an ardent Quickley supporter and believes in Quickley ceiling, and like you just kind of implied, doesn't believe that there's any ceiling on his positional flexibility. Like, just because you have a point guard doesn't mean that Immanuel Quickley still can't play many minutes a game. the one thing I want to jump in here and just say, kind of as a devil's advocate and kind of as like, I think it's a very valid point, is for as great as Quickley is in terms of his off-ball defense, and he is great, might be the best off-ball defender at the guard position in all of basketball. That has immense value. I still think that there is a discussion point to be had, and we don't need to have it on this episode. I don't know if we need to get this deep into the weeds, but when, playoff basketball is about it's mismatch hunting, and it's how many guys can we get into mismatches and really take advantage of. And it's usually, it's the two extremes, right? It's, let me pull your slow lumbering center into a high pick and roll and blow by them. Or at the other extreme, and this is the more common one, let me pull your small guard into the play on my big wing or like my big guard or whatever the case may be. And for as great as Quickley is as an off-ball defender, I do think there are some limitations in terms of how much you can play him and Brunson together in the playoffs, because he is still, a smaller guard. And like we saw Kyle Lowry take him into the post, a few times over the playoffs. And like you say, okay, well, it was like 3 or 4 times in the Miami series. And from that, you're going to draw the conclusion that, well, I don't know if the right matchup ever came along that was really there to truly exploit Quickley and Brunson together. And also they didn't play together that much in the playoffs, which is perhaps Tibbs saying, I don't want to exploit that. I've already spoken for too long about this. I feel like it is a discussion that is worth having when we get to the point of like, how wise is it to think that you can build fruitfully around these two players if your goal is to win a championship, which notably is different from winning a whole lot of regular season games, which I would completely agree. Immanuel Quickley could help any team.
Totally valid. No, I get that. So, I mean, we could talk about why Immanuel Quickley isn't starting, especially since he is capable of the two. Number one, he runs the second unit. That should be pretty much where we stop with a lot of this conversation, but that's what he is tasked with. Without him, there's, like if you swapped him and Grimes, there wouldn't really be anyone who could capably do exactly what Immanuel Quickley can do. But again, the Knicks also like more off-ball, higher catch and shoot players who can play at the two. Quickley did a very good job of that this past season, where he was one of the better. He was in the top 100 of catch and shoot players who took at least 100 catch and shoot threes. I believe he was 82nd. But that's, lower on the list than say Grimes or DiVincenzo, for example. So yes, Fournier certainly is an option in terms of but he's more the exception than the rule, because they wanted more pull-up abilities as opposed to just spot-up shooting. But Fournier has now been phased out of the lineup, and it seems that the Knicks kind of want something different. And again, it's not necessarily how you start, it's how you finish. Immanuel Quickley has been finishing games, at least in the regular season. He was finishing games consistently, and he was almost always on the court when the games were close. So it's, again, the Knicks look at him as someone who can still help them. It's just not in terms of starting. Yep. Anything before I continue?
No, nailed it.
So I want to frame a lot of this, not a lot of it, but some of this conversation in the lens of with OG Anunoby, because it's kind of just the elephant in the room situation. And there are 2 deadlines. And I'd like for people who maybe are a little unclear to think of them as solar eclipses, right? So there's the first solar eclipse, which is the rookie extension deadline, which is in October. Right. It's right before the season. And at that point, and John, you wrote 2 really great newsletters about this, when, if Quickley agrees to an extension, the door for something like an Anunoby trade slams shut. It makes it nearly impossible to get salaries to match and all of that. But if Quickley doesn't agree to an extension with the Knicks and decides to play in the following season with restricted free agency, then there's a second solar eclipse, so to speak, which is the trade deadline. And then at that point, you get into, okay, well, Quickley can't agree to an extension in season because the deadline passed before the year. And Anunoby is actually eligible to agree to an extension with the Raptors whenever, but the window to trade one for the other would pass. And now, again, the Knicks don't have to move Quickley for Anunoby. They don't have to get Anunoby. They don't have to move Quickley, period. But if they wanted to swap out, say, guard play for wing play, then this would certainly be the type of option. And we know from, Fred Katz all but reported that Quickley was involved in trades for premier players, which I would imagine
Trade
in this
talks,
case is like, a Paul George type player. We know that Quickley was included in the Donovan Mitchell trade. So it's not like Quickley has not been used in trade talks, which makes sense. He's a really good player. If you want to acquire really good talent, you have to give something up. And the Knicks happen to have the ability to create a better point guard situation in the future with some of their depth that they have, maybe overseas, like Hirokas Jokubaitis, or potentially in the draft. But before we get there, I want to hit pause on something, and I want to turn it to you and ask you a question.
Sure.
There have been a number of trade talks, all these different things that have happened in this offseason, and even slightly before, I guess, before July 1st. But there's one thing that's kind of stuck out for me. Would you like to take a guess as to what that would be?
Is it the absence of something, or is it something that has been discussed that just stood out to you?
Something that has been discussed that stood out to me.
In terms of trade stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just because your mind is like a labyrinth that puts the movie Labyrinth to shame, I'm not even going to wager a guess, and I just want you to tell me.
Okay, it's not as complicated as you might think, but I will say this. When the Knicks it was leaked that the Knicks were looking to make the move with the Pacers and the Suns. And it would have been Evan Fournier going to the Pacers, TJ McConnell going to the Suns, Cameron Payne going to the Knicks. The Knicks create a traded player exception that's large enough for a player like OG Anunoby, and the Pacers also would get draft compensation. When it happened, a lot of us, myself included, were just kind of honing in on the Fournier and the trade player exception part. And the Cameron Payne part was really just an afterthought. It was more like, look, you need the salary to make this work. He slides right into the Obi traded player exception, and that could work. And I don't think that this one move would have been then contingent upon something else happening. Because look, the Knicks could have very easily said, we like the idea of having a third point guard in the roster. Like they went into last season with Brunson starting, and they had Immanuel Quickley, and they started giving Derrick Rose fewer minutes, but still minutes nonetheless. So that's where Cameron Payne could fit in. But I just got to thinking this summer, and maybe it's just because there's simply too much time on my hands, and I'll fully acknowledge that. But it was a thought nonetheless, I thought potentially worth exploring, which was, we've talked about in the past where moving quickly, you need to have some sort of insurance. You need to have someone who can run the backup point guard spot, because it's not Deuce McBride, because it's just not how he's used. And maybe he could get there, but it's kind of a leap of faith for the Knicks to do that. And the Knicks always go from depth, but the Knicks are now bringing someone into the fold where I don't want to say that Cameron Payne would have needed minutes, but they've liked him for 2 years. They were very interested in him in the 2021 offseason.
That's correct.
Widely reported. So to me, the idea that they would have brought in Cameron Payne for just because of an insurance option and nothing else really follows, especially when he's in a contract year, it has not sat right with me. And granted, Cameron Payne is not a New York Knick. He went to the Spurs the Spurs acquired a second round pick just to take on his money. But the Spurs also don't necessarily need him. Like they've got Jones, and they have Devontae Graham once he's back from his DUI suspension that's only a few games long. Like, they're pretty much settled. So to have Cameron Payne in the fold, it feels like they could say, look, we could flip him for another second round pick, like a protected one. And I haven't felt good about this. From the perspective of, I love Immanuel Quickley on this team, and could that one move be the impetus for the Knicks feeling comfortable to then move him in another deal?
The only thing I'll say is, like, for anybody listening, be like, did Jeremy just say that he likes Cameron Payne better than Deuce McBride? No, that's actually precisely not what you're saying. Deuce McBride is a long-term prospect. I mean, he's entering his third year. He was a second-round pick. These guys take time to develop. I think if the Knicks, who are a team that I think could probably talk themselves into, at the very least, making a run to like the Eastern Conference Finals, if Jalen Brunson, knock on wood, he stays healthy, but if God forbid he was to go out for a couple of weeks or something, to ask, as you just kind of said, to ask Deuce McBride to step into the starting point guard role, that would be a lot. I know where you're going with this, and we're talking about a future world that potentially does not include Immanuel Quickley. That's part of the value that Quickley has, and I think in that situation, Payne, I could see Deuce McBride outplaying Payne in terms of minutes during some fantasy stretch that we're imagining where Brunson's out and like Quickley's not on the team. But to still have the security blanket of a guy who's made a deep playoff run, who could hit an outside shot pretty reliably, who knows how to run an NBA offense, like I see where you're going with it. That's all I wanted to just back you up on that before anybody came after you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really just contingency. I mean, just to continue. I mean, like the pros and cons of Cameron Payne. He's really good in the half court and transition as well. Grades out very well there. His pull-up shooting is pretty good. He can create shots quite well. He's a good playmaker. He's a good scorer. And the floater is fantastic. The cons,
love their floaters.
They do. They really do, especially from their guards. And the cons, I mean, he's an inefficient player, very much so. He does not really finish well at all. Not a good spot-up shooter. Isolation, he just can't. He's not capable of doing that. Rebounding, that's not one of his strengths. Obviously, on the offensive glass, that is very much what Quickley can do. Cameron Payne's a point guard. I mean, there's not a whole lot of versatility like in the way that we saw with Immanuel Quickley. And health. You know, Quickley has been very healthy outside of the injury that he sustained in the playoffs. Cameron Payne has battled a lot of injuries, and just kind of looking at them head to head. This is courtesy of B-Ball Index. You know, like when you look, if you're watching, if you look at the numbers, it's very clearly that Quickley is a better player, and it's not at all about, hey, right. It's not about, is Cameron Payne a better player than Immanuel Quickley? It's not that. No, the question here comes into play of, do the Knicks foresee a world in which OG Anunoby and Cameron Payne is better than having Immanuel Quickley for next year's team, right? And obviously there'd be draft pick compensation that has to go to, say, Toronto in this case, but it's not so much about that. It's just focusing on this team and the assets that they would have at their disposal.
This is a use of resources question. How much of your when you're a team with limited resources, as every NBA team for the most part is, how much credence do you give, or how much forethought do you give to the what if situation, the what if Quickley or the what if Brunson goes down situation? Again, neither of us are sitting here saying that is Immanuel Quickley's only value, but it is a part of the composition here. And I'll save other thoughts for later, but just for anybody who may be wondering, like, why are you guys so freaking keyed in on OG Anunoby of all players? Guys never made an all-star team, guy who's never even averaged 20 points a game. I don't think he's averaged 20 a game. Maybe he has. I don't know. But like, not a star player. I just read the landscape. Like it's very clear which superstar the Knicks have their eye on. It's been reported this week. We don't dance around it. Like, we know who that is. And I'm sure they'll keep an eye on Giannis and anybody else who maybe shakes free, but they've had their opportunities to go kick the tires on different stars. They have forecasted, to the extent that a team that doesn't do press conferences can forecast. We are not trading for one of these lesser stars. We are waiting for the big gun. So if you're thinking of like, well, what are the other ways that they could upgrade? And we know the Knicks are always looking to upgrade. Like, I don't know if he's the guy. He's the one out there. He's the one out there who might be available, even though his GM seems to make it such that he's not. And again, Fred Katz, you referenced Katz earlier. He's reported the Knicks made inquiries into prime-aged veterans, and those inquiries included talks for potentially some of their young players. Go look around the league. I've done it too many times to count that I'd like to admit. There are not a whole lot of prime-age veterans who've slotted to the substar category that are the type of player that the Knicks, with the age of their roster, so on and so forth, should be looking in the direction. He's by far the most obvious one. So again, in case anybody's wondering why we're keying on Anunoby, like, why do you guys have a hard on Anunoby? That's why. Okay.
Yeah, I really like him as a player. I think there's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but I think there's some offensive bloom on the rose that has not been uncovered in Toronto. But no, I mean, what you're saying, John, is completely apt to think that it's like, well, the Knicks must have him. It's not really a must. No. It's just looking at what we're seeing and what goes about there. And
go by the reporting.
I think the whole, it's been reported. And also, if you're looking at the Joel Embiid situation, which we know the Knicks will be monitoring, you have to think to yourself, okay, well, what is it going to take a year from now to get a player like him? Mm-hmm. And the thought process of, okay, is RJ Barrett going to be one of the players who is used to help you get Joel Embiid? Let's say he is. If that's the case, how are you potentially replacing RJ Barrett? You don't have cap space. You have fewer avenues. Like if you don't trade Immanuel Quickley, then are you using him on his new contract in order to upgrade at that position? And again, it's not going to be OG. And there aren't a ton of other players who can give you what OG can give you. Like Paul George, again, Knicks were afraid of the contract situation. He's probably going to opt out and sign a new contract. So he's out of play. So the last thing the Knicks want to do is get Joel Embiid into the door and then say, okay, how can we build around Joel Embiid? No. The answer, if you get Joel Embiid, is we're ready. And our team is completely set. And we traded from depth. And now we're in a really good spot. And we can retain a lot of our depth. And we can find ways to add to that as well, be it the draft, or, if there's a free agent signing, for trade, the tax mid-level or whatever it might be. But there are ways of going about it. But I mentioned, just in terms of, to shift it back to Cameron Payne, I said, if you're watching, this is what it looks like. If you're not watching, essentially last season, Quickley shot more than, percentile wise, he was in a percentile 2 times higher than Cameron Payne for true shooting percentage. Again, the inefficiency is very different here, but both were excellent in terms of their overall shooting and pull-up abilities. Quickley was better off ball. They both were pretty poor in terms of the rim shot creation. The finishing talent was around the same, but Payne was better. The floater, both elite at it. Both were very good. Quickley was better in terms of 3-point shooting talent. Isolation, Quickley was phenomenal. He was 97.5% percentile. Cameron Payne was not that. He was in the 32nd or 33rd percentile. And then offensive rebounding, Quickley's got Payne beat by a lot, and he hasn't beat by a good amount on the defensive end. So once again, it is not, is Payne better than Quickley? It's, would you quit using Quickley to get a player like Anunoby and replacing with Payne be an option that can work for the Knicks? So just, again, very quickly, want to run through some of the other stats. The Knicks,
good old EPM.
EPM, yep. As we can see here, for Cameron Payne, these are the last 3 seasons for each, and Quickley's only played 3 seasons anyway. Cameron Payne really saw his renaissance in the bubble, came back with the Suns. His first year, that COVID year was fantastic with them. 88th percentile on offense, 74th percentile on defense. Year after that,
paid.
It did get him paid. Yes. Year after that, stumbled a little bit on the offensive end, went down to the 57th percentile, but defensively stayed at 72nd. And this past season, the offense went back up and the defense went down. Offense was 73rd percentile. Defense was 43rd percentile. We talked about in the Archetype podcast how the Knicks really want players who are 75th percentile on either the offensive side or the defensive side. And Payne is really knocking on the door for the last 3 seasons. In one of those, again, the offense and the defense have fluctuated, but he's right there in terms of a lot of what the Knicks want. And with Quickley, he's just been phenomenal out the gate. He was 88th percentile his rookie year on offense, 42nd on defense. Well, 86th percentile on offense and 81st percentile the next year. And this past season, 78th percentile on offense and 93rd percentile on defense. He's a fantastic player. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just a matter of, do they want that type of talent packaged in a different position? And then last thing with Payne and IQ, if you look at the on-off stats from cleaning the glass that Cameron Payne has, the offensive side, the COVID year, 2020, 2021, and this past season, both phenomenal offensively. The in-between year, not as good offensively. He was 16th percentile in points per possession. But then it flipped from offense to defense, where the offense for both the COVID year and the 2022-23 year were not great, 34th percentile. But the middle year was 74th percentile. Whereas Quickley has just been...
lights out.
Lights out across the board. Yeah. His offense dropped a bit this past season, where it was 29th percentile from points per possession, which is very surprising considering the year before that it was 89th. Year before that it was 84th. And the defense, it just gets better and better. 82nd, 91st, and 99th percentile going up. So the talent is there. So if we wanted to find a way where, okay, the Knicks are looking at this and they're saying, we're trading someone who's really good for someone who's really good at a different position, and the Cameron Payne focus of this, how can we find something that just kind of checks off a lot of the boxes? Should Toronto finally, and I mean finally, be comfortable moving him off from OG Anunoby and by extension, probably Pascal Siakam. And the one thing I say before I get to that, it would not surprise me if the Knicks used Immanuel Quickley for OG Anunoby in the same way they used RJ Barrett with Donovan Mitchell, which was, look, we're tired of having these conversations. So instead of us dragging this out, we're setting up an ultimatum. Either we make this move and we include RJ Barrett, or we ink him to a new deal, and then we either find a way around it or another offer comes into play. And of course, the Knicks signed RJ Barrett, the Jazz didn't bluff, and the Cavs went on and traded for Donovan Mitchell. But this at least would set up some sort of deadline, because the Knicks don't like going into a new season where it's like we don't have as many options. And now Quickley's disgruntled because we didn't pay him and all these various factors. Does that seem like a fair potential prediction?
I'm not going to put a percentage chance on it because, like, I think there is a very, 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 very slim chance. I really want to say no chance, but you never know. That Immanuel Quickley is A, on the Knicks roster going into the season, and B, not signed to an extension. If he's signed to it, he'll either be signed to an extension if he's here, or he's not going to be here. That is my prediction. And just on the larger point that we haven't necessarily come out and said it. I think this entire discussion is basically suggesting, and I co-sign this 100%, is that if the Knicks had their druthers, they would flip Quickley, maybe with like some of the protected picks, for player X. And again, Anunoby is the most obvious name. If you out there listening or watching have another name that slots into player X, feel free to insert that name instead. I just can't seem to find one. I don't think Jeremy has found as good a one either. And then RJ, and for Embiid it would be Mitch, but like some other salary, and then all the picks, all the rest of the picks. That's the star package. I think if they had their druthers, that's how this thing goes over the next 10, 11, 12 months. But yeah, that's it.
No, it's fair. And like I spent a lot of time trying to identify another target if it weren't to be someone like
they're not out there, dude.
That's the issue, right? Like, again, I know that with, say, like EPM, the reason I go to that is because it tells a great story in terms of what the Knicks seem to like. And maybe it's the sort of thing where that's not their go-to type of database, but it's a very useful one that front offices do use. And you're able to identify, okay, well, these all track. This lines up with that, and it makes sense there. And when I try to do the same thing with the criteria and looking back in the last 3 to 4 seasons of players that were, really great defensively and at least okay on offense, and there's a decent volume of threes that are taken and that they hit, the list is really slim. And then when you say, okay, well, what happens if they were to look for players who are a little bit younger, who aren't, say, 33 years old, like Paul George, the list gets even smaller. Yeah. And it's harder to find people who are able to be on that list multiple seasons in a row. And that's exactly what OG Anunoby does, is seemingly every year he fits the criteria of what they look for, which is why, again, John and I get hung up on this type of player, because the Knicks seem to get hung up on this type of player because that's just what they like. And there aren't a ton of options out there. So this would be my solution. If you were to go about, okay, Masai Ujiri is finally willing to make something happen, and you want to get Immanuel Quickley, use him as a trade chip, but you also want to get Cameron Payne, is this type of move where the Knicks would be getting OG Anunoby and Cameron Payne. The Raptors would be getting Doug McDermott, Immanuel Quickley, and in this case, it would be the Mavericks' first round pick. And the Spurs would be getting Evan Fournier, and then a likely protected second round pick from the Raptors, because the Knicks, of course, are still giving up a first round pick here. You give up a very highly protected second round pick if you're Toronto. And the reason for going through this again, okay, so the Knicks have their cake and eat it too, in terms of they do improve the roster and they have some depth at the one. The Raptors save $721,000. They get the standard type of package that you would be getting for a really good veteran, which would be expiring salary of a veteran. It'd be a young player on a rookie contract, and it would be a future first-round pick or a first-round pick. And then the Spurs save $1.3 million. They finally get Evan Fournier where he wants to go, the French connection with Wembanyama. And even if they didn't get a second-round pick out of this, they'd essentially be turning cap space and Doug McDermott into, salary filler and 2 second-round picks, which is a pretty good deal because they don't do very much in this type of move. And they do get a better player in Evan Fournier than who Doug McDermott is. So this is kind of the 3-team deal where if you had to work out the pieces to get everyone going, because I thought about, look, you could just do OG Anunoby and for Quickley and Fournier and a pick and make it easy, and then just absorb Cameron Payne. But I don't know, there's something cleaner about this than if you'd gone about it doing 2 separate transactions. You make Fournier happy going where he goes. And more importantly, potentially the Raptors wouldn't save money in that situation. They'd actually be taking on more money by acquiring Fournier and Quickley and sending out Anunoby. So just kind of where my head is at. I'll turn it to you to get your thoughts.
The fascinating part of this is, of course, that the Spurs own the Raptors' first-round draft pick, top 6 protected the next 2 years. So the notion that the Spurs and Raptors are doing a trade, does it make the Raptors a little bit better? Does it make the Raptors a little bit worse? They probably make arguments for both sides, and like the Spurs own their pick. I have to think the Raptors would love to have that pick back. I'm not sure that there's a realistic way for them to get that pick back in this trade. This feels a little light for Toronto to get Quickley and the Dallas pick for Anunoby. I would guess it would take at least another one of the protected picks, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well, the thinking again, the suitors that are out there as well for Anunoby, like I look at the Grizzlies, they're an option.
Sure, yeah.
But the Grizzlies also just gave Payne a max contract. They've got Ja on a max contract. They just acquired Marcus Smart. They're paying Jaren Jackson Jr. Before you know it, their payroll is likely to be close to $190 million for not this season, but the season after that. And that means they'd be deep into the luxury tax. And even if they swapped Kennard out and had, Anunoby going in, add an extra $15 million, because Kennard would be $15 million. Yeah. Anunoby, let's say, he's making 30. You're still talking about them making now 205.
At least 30.
Right. Like, and that's,
I think that's light for Anunoby, what his next contract is going to be.
Sure. No, I completely get it. And look, if it took, say, the Wizards first to add into that, but I struggle to see a team that is offering a really good young player.
Well,
and multiple first round picks, protected or not. Because again, I think we could both say last year we thought that the Mavs pick was certainly going to convey, and it didn't. But the Mavs got better as a team, and they tanked for that. And I don't see them by any stretch looking to miss the playoffs this year after last year happened.
Yeah, I think it's tough because the Mavs pick, you just kind of hit on it. It's an asset with a lot of variance. You know, the top 10 protections obviously aren't great. I guess for me, it's two things. One, this trade treats Immanuel Quickley like a really premium young player. And again, I know I'm going to piss off a lot of people listening to this when I say this. I just don't think he's at that level. I think if we're grading young players on a scale of like 1 to 10, with 10 being like Wembanyama this year and like 0 being, I don't know, some undrafted player that you're never going to hear about, this trade. I don't know if it puts Quickley at like a 7, but I think he's more of a 6. I basically think he's one level down from whatever his grade would be for this trade to happen. And the other part of it is, and this is the real tough part, anytime you talk about Anunoby, I don't know that we're dealing with a rational actor here in Masai Ujiri, and we don't need to go down that road, but like this is a man who just lets talent walk out the door because, and I think Fred said this on the pod at some point over the last several months, Masai is the type of guy where it's like he has a price. He'll tell the team, this is the price. This is what this guy's going to cost. Yeah. And there's no negotiation. He's like, either meet the price or there's no more talk after that. And if that's what he's doing with Anunoby, and we don't necessarily know that is what he's doing with Anunoby, but if it is, if he maybe it would be reasonable for him to take this deal, but maybe he just has a price in his head. And if the price isn't met, he's going to take it into unrestricted free agency and maybe lose Anunoby for nothing, like he lost Van Fleet and several other guys. So, yeah, that's the tough part about all this.
Sure. I think a big chunk of this comes down to because you and I see Quickley somewhat differently in terms of what his capacity is. If he goes to Toronto, and I get it, it's the player you'd be playing ahead of would be Dennis Schroeder, but like he's a starting point guard. And I think in other situations too, if he weren't blocked by Brunson, and the Knicks didn't have their pick of let's have more of an off-ball player next to him in the backcourt, Quickley would be starting, but that's not where he is. And again, he's finishing games. That's what's most important. But
you might be right.
But I guess my mindset here is I don't want to look at this Mavs pick as just like, oh, it's late 20s, so it's not going to matter. Like we went into last season with another expectation, and it turned out that the pick was if they had actually acted like a rational actor and tried to win, probably hovering around 14th or 15th.
It was a pick that was going to be the 11th pick in the draft until the Mavs did something that was sanctionable by the league. Sure.
I'm saying if they hadn't started losing and then
exactly.
Kicked off the chain of events. So
no, it would have been great. Anyway.
I guess my whole philosophy is I know that OG Anunoby is someone that the Knicks really could use from an archetype standpoint. But if it costs that much more than Quickley and a first round pick, especially considering how the Raptors don't even have a first round pick, most likely in next year's draft, unless they lose enough games, and having OG doesn't exactly help them lose games unless he's hurt, which happens, but still his impact will be there. It's a sort of thing where why would you not want a pick in the draft? But again, a lot of it depends on what they're doing with Siakam. Maybe they're waiting on the Hawks to up the ante and they feel comfortable about a deal with the Knicks before that. Maybe they're not close on either. Maybe it's the other way around. I have no idea. But I think a lot of this just comes down to how you evaluate Immanuel Quickley, how you evaluate the first round pick, and going in that direction.
Yeah, I think we could agree slightly on Quickley. Here's my problem. I don't think about him from the perspective of what would he look like as a starting point guard on a different team. And you are correct to look at him from that perspective, especially when we're talking about trades that sent him to another team, which he would be the starting point guard. And he'd be really, really, really good. And he'd probably look even better than he does here. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I love the architecture of this. Yeah. And I just wonder, look, Toronto, we entered the offseason with Toronto maybe being the biggest question mark in the league, and it's the late August and they're still the biggest question mark in the league. Nobody knows what the hell's going on.
Yeah. So, all right, let's bring us home. Just very quickly, the other thing in terms of, all right, let's say you didn't want to see Immanuel Quickley be moved and just keep him, which the Knicks could absolutely do. And as a Quickley fan, I'd be more than okay with that. But let's look around the league. How many teams have their starting point guard and a lead guard off the bench who are each earning $17 million or more per year? Reason I have 17.
This is great.
Originally I had 18, but that would have just missed Derek White with the Celtics. So I thought, fine, I'll drop it to 17. So yeah, the Celtics, Derek White and Malcolm Brogdon. Well, Brogdon was almost traded. They moved off of Marcus Smart's contract because they wanted to get some positional versatility as a big man. They got Kristaps Porzingis. The Brooklyn Nets, they have Spencer Dinwiddie. He's an expiring contract. And Ben Simmons, who I guess if you consider him a point guard, he doesn't even play much anyway. So he's kind of just whatever. And then the Golden State Warriors. They took Jordan Poole's contract and turned it into Chris Paul and his expiring deal. If you gave truth serum to all three of these franchises and asked, would you be cool if the player that you had on a large contract coming off the bench weren't on your team anymore? The contract could just be completely vanished. You could amnesty it with nothing, no ifs, ands, or buts. Would you do it? All three of these franchises would likely say yes. The one question being the Celtics, because they don't have anyone really backing them up, but Brogdon is hurt and that contract is really not even that movable, especially not now. And that's not to say that Immanuel Quickley would follow in these footsteps in the same way, right? Quickley is a lot younger. He's a lot healthier, different circumstances, but it just goes to show that the NBA doesn't necessarily build their team in this way of we're paying a guard a lot of money and the guard who's behind him is also making a lot of money. It just doesn't happen that frequently. So current situation financially, the Knicks are about $4.6 million below the luxury tax. Totally fine. 2024, if they gave Immanuel Quickley $18 million, they'd be $10 million below the luxury tax before factoring in first round picks and any potential superstar trades or any other additions. If you had Anunoby and Cameron Payne coming in and Quickley and Fournier out, the Knicks would be a little bit closer to the tax line, $2.5 million, but they would be still very comfortably below it. The following year, 2024-25, they would have a lot of flexibility. If they kept the cap holds of Hartenstein and Payne and Anunoby, they'd be at around $10 million over the luxury tax. Again, if they're fine paying the tax, that's great. Anunoby's cap holds around 30 or 28 million. He wants to make a little over 30. There's a potential that Cameron Payne doesn't even come back if they wanted to have Rokas for a lot cheaper at that position. So there's flexibility here. But you might be saying, okay, well, what if the Knicks instead of Quickley used Grimes, right? Why does it have to be Quickley? It doesn't. But here's the factor. If they had Anunoby in and they had Grimes and Fournier out, and there's no need for Cameron Payne necessarily because they have Immanuel Quickley still there, they'd have a little bit more room under the luxury tax where if they wanted Cameron Payne still, they could absorb him and be under the luxury tax this year. Totally fine. But the following year, the 2024-25 season is where things would start to get dicey because you're paying Quickley, let's say $18 million as a starting salary. That would probably be an $80 million contract, which might even still be low. Yep. And you've got Anunoby's salary on the books and you still have Hartenstein and his cap hold. And again, you could always waive him, but now a lot of suitable backup 5 options that you can get who are as good as him and fit what the Knicks want. You're looking at that situation before first round picks for any superstar trade that might be involved. And the Knicks are already almost $13.5 million above the luxury tax. And the second tax apron thing, all that, I mean, it's $17.5 million above the tax line. So the Knicks are really close to the super tax level if they keep Quickley in any Anunoby trade and move Grimes out there, which again, if they feel like spending money, totally fine. But there are limitations that come with it. And teams are kind of trying to get out of the super tax. It's not a hard cap, but it's viewed as such for a lot of teams that might not really want to spend it. So financially speaking, if you're the Knicks and you want to have your cake and eat it too, Quickley's salary is kind of becoming, the fly in the ointment, so to speak, if you go this route. And the Knicks don't have to, but I just want fans to be aware if you went about it that way and kept Quickley and still went in Anunoby, there are some slight salary issues. And just to wrap it up before I turn it back over to you, John, yeah, Quickley can still extend with the Knicks. I think that would be fantastic. I'd love for that to happen. Even still, Payne, you can bring him in. You don't have to bring him in. It doesn't really matter. They don't have to have a connection between the two. IQ wanting to start is not a reason to trade him. I see it online a lot. You don't trade a player because they want to start. No, you trade that player when they are best used for your personal or professional gain. You don't do a service to Quickley if it works out, which I imagine it would in any trade, then it works out, but you don't do it for that reason. We said, New York likes the cake and eating it too in terms of depth and adding talent, taking a player that's out of the rotation, turning them into a player that's into the rotation. Having Payne in the fold if you move Quickley would essentially be a repeal and replace, unlike the healthcare plan that the Republicans decided to put forth, where it was like, oh, we'll get rid of it and we'll figure it out later. That's not what the Knicks do. The Knicks say, no, we know what we need to solve. We're going to do it this way, and we have to do it because we want to cover all our bases. And once again, this was never about is Quickley better than Payne. He is, case closed. It's turning your value as a team of Quickley and any draft equity that it might take to get Anunoby and also bring in Payne to have a well-rounded team that you feel can really start winning you even more games than the 47 that the Knicks won last season.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, no, it's about graduating to the next level and, reaching your ideal roster finish line, so to speak, which is what this is all geared towards. The only other thing I want to say in regards to that slide where you had, three, and really, if those teams had their druthers, zero backup point guards or whatever, first guard off the bench, making over 17 million. I'm sure a lot of people looked at that and be like, well, it's not Quickley's fault that he should be starting. He's good enough to start. He's easily one of the next three best players or four best players. So that's an unfair metric. Well, sure. But then you look around the league and be like, okay, how many teams have two small guards starting together in the same backcourt? And I can only think of one, and it's Cleveland. And there are some real question marks about whether that is sustainable long-term. And you may be of the belief that Immanuel Quickley and Jalen Brunson are a better offensive pairing, and certainly are a better defensive pairing than Garland and Mitchell. I think that's would be an interesting debate. Not one we're going to have today, but like just traditionally throughout all of NBA history, teams generally don't, absent exigent circumstances, like a small guard who is just a dynamo defensively. Teams don't generally, on and off ball, I should say, teams don't generally build around two small guards or have two small guards taking up a majority of their spending power, regardless of when the cap was 30 million or, when it's going to be 300 million in 10 years or whatever it is. So, I look, we share a lot of the same thoughts on this, even if our evaluation of Quickley may be slightly different. And I think it just comes down to not what the Knicks want. I think we have an idea of what the Knicks want. Now it's a matter of, do they have someone to dance with? And, we'll see. Season doesn't start for almost 2 months. So there's time. Yeah. Good stuff. We came in right under the gun because I got to get out of here. Jeremy, anything else before we before we leave?
That'll be all. Thanks, people, for indulging just some thoughts, stream of consciousness as we get through the dog days of summer.
Come on. Who else is providing you with this level of analysis in late August on an NBA podcast about one team? No one. That's the answer. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Andrew, behind the scenes on the ones and twos. Andrew, if I have to say anything that I'm forgetting in the next 15 seconds, let me know. Otherwise, I will thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. I've teased it a few times now. We have a pretty major NBA media person coming on the pod this week to discuss many different topics. And so stay tuned for that. And, more fun and games like usual coming your way as we continue along this summer. Till then, peace out.